Yeah, but this is part of a wider initiative that myself and Gillian is part of. It's a creative arts project for people, young people affected by the justice system, 16 to 24-year-olds. And part of me and Gillian's role is to host a live discussion here once a month. So it's a pleasure to have both of you here.
Thank you.
Nola from London,
yes,
and Romarilyn from St. Louis, by way of California. Yes, I remembered. How did you?
From California by way of St. Louis.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, St. Louis first.
Yeah. Nellyville.
Yes. Although, kind of mad at Nelly right now.
Why?
He performed for Trump.
Okay.
So did Snoop, which, you know.
It's interesting that they're all bending the knee and kissing the ring, aren't they?
Shame on them.
Yeah. And a lot of people have been revealed, masks have been uncovered.
Absolutely. But we're not talking about them.
No,
we're talking about G.
Yeah. How did you guys meet?
I feel like I just told this
Tell
story,
it again.
but I will tell it again.
I think you forgot a few things.
Did I? Okay, so feel free to chime in, Romarilyn. So I used to work for the Criminal Justice Alliance, and the then director of the Criminal Justice Alliance went to the Beyond the Bars conference in the States. Was it the California one or the New York one?
It's the Los Angeles at UCLA.
Yeah. And she was really inspired by it and was just thinking, I want to spend a little bit more time in the States, finding out, what's going on, what's happening. So she went back for an extended trip and found out about the Just Leadership USA organization. And I think she was really inspired by it because in the UK, we do have, or in London specifically, we do have like a lived experience movement, if you will. But people tend to be kind of, pigeonholed into roles that are like grassroots, client-facing, your kind of peer mentor roles.
Like youth and community roles and things.
Which is fine because when you're coming home, you're not in a position to really be like, I'm not going to take that job. But I think there comes a point where you need progression.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, what's going to inspire you to not turn your back and go back instead of going forward? So she was really inspired that we were kind of moving the pin in terms of people being in more prominent positions, leadership, policy, starting up their own organisations. And she was like, why don't we have anything like this in London? We need something like this in London. So she met Romarilyn, was really inspired by Romarilyn, came home and thought, we need something like this in a kind of a UK London context. And she basically got funding for a couple of years of a pilot and then onboarded me as the program manager. And I developed the syllabi. It was a 12-month program, a really comprehensive program. So thinking about all the different aspects of what somebody will need as a leader, but also bearing in mind that they have lived experience of the criminal justice system, probably have been to prison. So things like coaching, therapeutic support, because you know that there's going to be some limited mindsets, like a work experience, and like good places like the Ministry of Justice, like good senior roles, things in policy, campaigning, so kind of to give like an overall kind of comprehensive view on what it is to be a leader. And we were like, we need somebody to kind of give us a bit of the US flavour and to obviously pay homage because this is a program that's come from the US. We've liked it and wanted to replicate it. So we were like, can we get Romarilyn to do a talk as part of the kind of, we had like a open day / symposium at Westminster University, kind of introducing the program and kind of getting a feel for who would want to do the program. People received Romarilyn's video recording so well that we were like, how are we going to get Romarilyn here in the flesh? So I was like, Romarilyn, we really want you to be part of this program. We're having a residential because we kind of kicked off the program with a residential, get everybody together, kind of get that camaraderie, that, and get a sense of people because, you know, I feel like when you spend an extended amount of time with people, your kind of defenses and your guards kind of come down. You realise everybody's on the same page. They all have similar experiences. So I was like, Romarilyn, please, will you come to cold England in February for the residential? And she was like, sure. And then you know, me and Romarilyn just became really good friends because I really respect her journey. I see her as like a mentor to me because she has always encouraged and cheerled for me and like encouraged me to kind of push myself forward. So yeah, I really appreciate that, and representation always matters.
Absolutely.
No matter how big and old we are, we always need to be able to look and say, okay, somebody's doing it, I can do it. So yeah, and then since then I haven't left Romarilyn alone basically. So like 3 or 4 years later.
How does it feel, Romarilyn, you know, given the life that you've had, which we'll get into, but in this space you are now where you're travelling to different countries, meeting different people and collaborating, like it seems like you're a busy woman and you're in demand. Well, what's it like, Mrs. Worldwide?
I know.
It's fun. It's really awesome to, you know, have the visibility to talk about my experiences, but to meet people all over the world that have a shared experience, and I think a language that we share that a lot of other people don't have. When we talk about incarceration, there's a lot of things that we can say that is sometimes almost unsaid, but we get it. If we're talking about conditions or food or healthcare or isolation, separation, visitation, we understand what that looks like and feels like as an incarcerated person. And then the reintegration part, you know, how difficult it is to re-enter into your community and even into your family. And so these are things that we understand about one another that doesn't take a lot of explanation, and it shouldn't. But when we're speaking with the general public oftentimes and they want to know, you know, how was it in prison and how can we help you, it feels like oftentimes that we have to keep explaining and keep sharing and keep telling and keep re-traumatizing ourselves just to get crumbs from social services or from individuals, and sometimes even our family. They want to know the down and dirty details of prison. They don't really want to help us. They just want to know, what did you do in prison? What was done to you in prison? What are some of the boogeyman things that we should know about you? When really, prison isn't all of those things that we see produced in Hollywood.
No.
You know, it's not that. It's that, and, you know, folks are in general population, some are in isolation, some live their lives just like a Hollywood script, but for the most part, I would say 70 to 80%, if not more, of incarcerated people are trying to rebuild their lives. They're trying to figure out, how did I get here?
And there's a
How
lot
do
of
I
them,
get out?
A lot of them like should not even be there. They have mental health issues. They're in their own facilities altogether.
Addiction issues and things like that.
Neurodiversity, where, you know,
And they're not getting the proper treatment.
Exactly.
And then they're going back out into society and reoffending, and and the cycle continues.
On the neurodiversity bit, I don't know how many people I've met down through the years where they went through their life thinking that they were stupid. And then they're in prison and they might get an assessment, and then they get the support, and then they're sitting in a inside out program or they're sitting in a class and they're learning, whereas they went through their life thinking. But if you go through your life thinking that's just stupid, maybe you were in school and you found it difficult because you didn't get the support. And when I was in school, I didn't have anything like that, but I had bad behaviour. So, but we were all in the same class, you know, the people that couldn't learn, the people that didn't want to learn, or because there was all various issues. But I often look at the people that, you know, good kids in school, well behaved, turned up on time, but they just weren't able because the system didn't, you know, the rigid system didn't suit them. But they're the children then that they have such limited life opportunities when education doesn't suit them. And they're the people then, they end up in prison, they're on that life trajectory, whereas if they had the intervention, they could have a completely different life.
Yeah, that's true. There's still such a big misunderstanding about neurodiversity, people being able to access services in school, even like in pre-sentencing reports. That's never seldom taken into consideration, like how somebody understands the world, because you need to think of it, they have a completely different lens. I'm not saying that that negates their responsibility for any of their actions, but it also means that, you know, they're wired a bit differently.
It's a mitigating circumstance.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
explains
And that
things,
needs to be like taken in. And I feel like similar to like pupil referral units. So, you know, I don't know what you call them here in Ireland, but you know, like when kids get permanently excluded from school, we have like units called a pupil referral unit. It just means they're out of mainstream.
Expel.
It's a little school,
It's like
small
youth reach.
school. Yeah,
Like
they
youth
don't
reach,
do proper GCSEs.
Sometimes
all the
they
bad
get paid
kids
to go
grouped
to
together.
school, they might get an allowance or something.
It's horrible, and most of the time those are pipelines to prison, because 90% of people that go to them ends up in a gang, ends up in prison. Like, all the data is there, and I would go as far as to say that people with undiagnosed neurodiversity also end up in prison, because like you said, there's something there. They've got all this stigma that they've had. Oh, you're the naughty kid, you're thick, you're stupid, you can't learn. They've internalized that. And then, you know, that's meant that they can't kind of interact with society. So that they go on the fringe, and you know what happens on the fringe. You end up on the wrong side of the law. And so I think that there's a big thing with that, with neurodiversity.
But it's the same for kids who need to people please and who are really outgoing and just want to make friends and that will do anything to be accepted and liked. So you have the two, but in either instance, it's still the oppressive system, the criminal legal system, that says you should know better.
Yeah.
How do you know better when you've only lived 10 years or 12 years or 14 years, and most of those years were very traumatic? You know, you can't possibly understand the ramifications of your actions.
No.
But yet you're held responsible to them. And so whatever your diagnosis is, whatever your experience is, it has to be matched with levels of maturity, support, education, etc. But within the criminal legal system, they don't look at that. They basically look at zip code and color.
Yeah.
You know, where you're from and what you look like. And then they label you this, that, or the
Or
other.
class.
Yeah.
You know, in Ireland, it'd be class as well. Like,
The zip code.
yeah, might be all white
Class.
people, but it's like, what part of the river do you come from?
Where you live.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And then your card is marked very early on. And I mentioned the last time we did a podcast here, but in Ireland we have Gillian is a member of the travelling community. You might have Irish travellers in England, So there was a lady, a traveller woman, brought her children to the police station here to get her children's passports stamped, you know, to get passports to bring the kids on holidays. One of the children was a toddler, and the Gardaí, the police here, they have a pulse. It's like an online, it's like an internal database. Whereas, like, if I stop you outside and I'm a police officer, I have to log that, your details. You mightn't have committed a crime, but there was an interaction that gets logged.
Right.
Okay, so the police officer logged the toddler because it was basically profiling. Sure, he's a traveller, he's from that side, he's going to be on the system anyway when he's older. But there was a whistleblower, and the woman won the court case and got compensated. But it just gave you an insight as to what goes on and how people from certain areas with certain names or certain backgrounds, how they're policed differently and how they're profiled even from an early age. And then when let's say that toddler grows up and he gets arrested for something innocuous and he goes to prison, then society looks at, typical. But they don't realise his card was marked long before he did anything.
Exactly. And probably somebody else from a different side of town will get arrested for that same thing. And what will happen? They'll get a slap on the wrist because they're like, oh, well, it's a good child that's made a bad mistake.
And that will wreck their chances in life.
Exactly.
University and
all
opportunities.
Of those considerations,
But we have it with the drug laws in Ireland. We have like, if you're caught for drugs for possession, it's like a decriminalisation, but it's only like twice, if it happens to you twice. So let's say you're unlucky enough to be in college, or say you're in college and you get caught with some weed or an ecstasy tablet or some cocaine, then you go to court, you won't get a conviction.
Right.
And if you get caught twice, you'd want to be really unlucky to get caught twice, which will avoid conviction. But if you get caught a third time, you'll get the conviction. Who's that law for? It's for maybe the politician's son or daughter that's going to university. But for an addict in here, that's irrelevant, because the whole point of addiction is repeating the same behaviour in spite of the negative consequences. So there's a class base within the justice system as well. Something that picked up on there, you don't call it the criminal justice system. You call
the legal system, or the criminal punishment system.
Why?
There's no justice in it. It's oppressive.
Yeah. What's the similarities then between UK and America in terms of prison environment, supports available, knowing that you know each other's stories? Would one system be better in terms of education opportunities, or maybe psychological supports? Or
that's interesting, because I feel like you can't necessarily make a direct comparison, because, you know, like in the UK, we have private prisons. Private prisons are a lot different, you know, like from the food that you get, your access to education, what your cell's like, the condition of the actual jail, because it's going to be new, or some people are in like old prehistoric, dungeon style, like,
Victorian
you know what
buildings,
I mean? Exactly. So it's different. But I think that when me and Ro speak, one interesting story we both had was about reintegration, and I was saying that when I came home, the only job that I was getting offered was in pret-a-manger. Now, I don't think that that's a bad job, but prior to going to prison, I had a good job. I worked for the NHS. I was a senior administrator. I had a degree, or a diploma, because I didn't finish the whole thing, so I did the 2 years. So I had a diploma. But, you know, and it felt like a back step. Do you know what I mean? And when I was like, oh, well, the Pret-a-Manger Foundation do all of this stuff, and they're really sympathetic to people that have been to prison.
What's the Pret-a-Manger Foundation?
So it's, you have it, I saw it in Dublin. It's like a cafe, basically. Yeah. But they have a foundation where they will allow a certain percentage of people who come home from prison to work in their stores. You know, they won't bother with all the CRB, the criminal record check. They'll just give you a chance, basically. But it's all kind of early shifts and, you know, to kind of see what you're about, see if you're serious. And then, well, as much as you may be able to progress in the cafe, but it might be just something on your CV, a little bit of money in your pocket, and then you can go on from there. But I think it's more for people that maybe have never had a job.
That's what I was
because
thinking
as you know, so a lot of people, when they get to prison, that's like a real shock to the system. They've never had a job, whether they've been on the road selling drugs, whether they've had substance misuse issues, whether they've just been hustling and ducking and diving, or they've never had a conventional job, because we're all working, but they've never had a conventional job.
Dealing with regular people, you know, but that's a good
and navigating life.
Yeah, because like if you're dealing with regular people and you're speaking, like when I think of my own story, when I was kind of getting myself together, again having a CV with nothing on it, but I was doing a C scheme, a community employment scheme. It's like working for your dole. You get an extra 20 euros on the top. So some of my friends were like, I would not do that, I would not work for 20 euros, but I was like, I have nothing on my CV. But it was like working in an office, cleaning. But as the time went on, I was speaking with the HR, with the fundraisers, I was getting more confident. I was looking on the ground. After a couple of weeks, I was looking people in the eye. And all these things they're not really tangible, but you feel like that you're all the better for it. And then,
benefits,
and then you get a bit more confident. You say, no, man, I'm ready for the next step.
Yeah. Exactly. And I feel like, so that serves a purpose for that. But when I try to kind of push a little bit and say, you know, maybe what about an admin job? Because I wasn't expecting to necessarily go into something exactly the same, acknowledging that, you know, my life has changed now. I've got this criminal record. I'm going to have to navigate the system. But felt really stuck. In actual fact, I couldn't get a job for about, I want to say maybe like 2 or 3 years. And, you know, I had my son, so I'm thinking about how I'm going to fend for him, how I'm going to provide for him. And I actually had to start off volunteering. So it's interesting. Maybe I should have taken the job in Pret-a-Manger. But at that time, I felt conflicted, as in that's not something that I wanted to do. But why I use that as an example is because Robert had a similar experience where they were trying to mug you off with some job. What was the job?
McDonald's. After 23 years in prison, several
your
degrees,
education, exactly.
And I was like, are you kidding me? The same program that wrote me letters of support for my parole board hearings that offered me employment, health benefits, vision care, all of these things when I got there, basically told me that they don't have any of those things to offer me, but there is a job at McDonald's that I could get. And I said, I don't work at McDonald's. I'm sorry. No. You know, I'm just not going to do it. I've never worked at McDonald's, so why should I do it now?
It's very disheartening for people, you know, when they're released from prison. I was in prison myself. And like, for me, prison did serve its purpose. You know, I mean, I left school at 13. I was in a detention centre for a while and then progressed on to prison. No junior cert or anything like that. And that's where I started my education journey. But when you come out like that, you mentioned the volunteer work, that's what you're expected. That's what it's like you take the scraps that's been given to you.
Yeah.
I had nothing on my CV. So I was happy enough, not that I was happy enough to do it, but I had to start somewhere, you know what I mean? And going back into education and getting my degree and building myself up. But from listening to you, you had already kind of done that piece before you.
Yeah. So it was interesting.
So that was very difficult, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it was difficult. And like I said, I knew that I knew that I wasn't necessarily going to just embed myself back into my job. Although, interestingly, I did approach the NHS when I came home, because I think my manager at the time gave me a character reference for my pre-sentencing report. So she knew, you know, and obviously when they didn't see me for a few years and then I came back, I was like, yeah, well, they locked me up. But, you know, when I went back, I disclosed to them, you know, did this nice disclosure letter. This is what I've done, but I've worked for you for how many years, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, oh, yeah, OK, you can come and work for us again. You can't do your old job because, like, you're a danger to the public because my conviction was for GBH. But you can work in the back office kind of, you know, like doing whatever paperwork. And to be honest, I was grateful. You know, I was like, OK, well, fine. Maybe after 6 months, a year, they realise I haven't attacked anybody there. Yeah. I might be able to, you know. But they did this, I don't know what the word is, but my son calls it koalas. But basically they hoodwinked me. Yeah. And they were like, oh, wait a couple of months. My son had an accident. He broke his leg really badly, was hit by a car, and he had these metal pins in his leg. So I couldn't start the job for like 6 weeks. After that 6 weeks, when I tried to get my job, they said, oh no, we've moved from Croydon PCT, which was our national healthcare provider, to NHS England, and your paperwork wasn't 2p'd over.
We've a lovely word in Irish for that. Clawmast. Yeah. It's like they're putting you on the long finger, they're trying to really making a fool out of you, but they're not, it's not direct, and you're kind of getting it subtle, and then after a while you go, all right, this is not going to happen.
And see, this is the problem with the criminal legal system, and when folks come home from prison. They expect us to be saints, and yet they're providing us with no support.
There's no resources.
And so we see recidivism rates around the world extremely high. I mean, how do you expect someone to serve years in prison? They've rehabilitated themselves, got educated, learned a number of probably vocational skills, soft skills, social skills, come home, and at every turn, people are expecting you to be the same person who went in. No one is the same person after years go by. And so the system is rigged. That's why it's a punishment system and it's a legal system. You go in at 16, you come home at 35. Why are you holding me hostage to the same things I did at 16 when I'm now 35 years old and I have an entirely different mindset, set of skills and knowledge that can be used to be really productive and help advance my community, when all people really want to know about you and expect from you is to be that same person. No one's that same person. And so when states and governments want to know why they have a recidivism rate that's 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, why are people going back to prison over and over again? It's not because we're derelicts we don't care, we're lazy, etc. You're throwing out thousands of barriers to our reentry progress.
Exactly.
You're not offering us the right employment. You're not offering us quality housing, health care, support, etc., and so on. You really have no choice. You've left all of your community inside. You've left an environment where you've had a job, you're earning a little money, you're communicating with your kids and your family, you come home, and the parole department, or whatever it's called in your country, is saying, you can't go over here, you can't be around those people, you can't see your kids. All of these barriers is, I think, really detrimental to reintegration, because it's not taken into account that the person, number one, has served their time. Has served their time. When we come out of those cages, we should be able to leave that behind.
Yeah.
But the free world, as we call it, won't let us. I mean, we have to fight tooth and nail to say, every day to say, I'm not that person. I'm no longer the 24-year-old Romarilyn. I'm now the 47-year-old grown-ass woman who has spent the last 2.5 decades, reinventing myself.
Yeah.
But you want to hold me hostage to the 24-year-old who was homeless, who was on drugs, who had been abused for years, who didn't have any support around her. It's just unbelievable that anyone is able to rise above all of that.
It was mentioned earlier on by somebody, people succeed in spite of, not because of the system.
But they don't understand what it really takes to move from A to B to C.
And they don't want to know.
It takes so much from somebody to get through that and to be a success in their lives.
And then they call you a unicorn, or they say they're
Exactly.
special, or you're exceptional, or you're not like them.
Or they use you as the stick to beat others with.
Yes, the poster child.
Look at Nola or Romarilyn or Gillian and James, why can't you do that? And we all have different sets of circumstances.
And I just want to speak to what Romarilyn said about, going to prison, whether or not you've done a life sentence, it becoming like a life sentence because you have this perpetual stigma following you everywhere. So I had a juvenile record because I went through a number of adverse childhood experiences. So like yourself, I went through all of that, being remanded to local authority care, being somewhere like where you're locked in the night and all of that kind of stuff. So institutionalized from a really young age. I remember when I actually went for the safe job in the NHS, and there's two stories I have. One is I wanted to be a social worker because people with trauma want to help people, be the change you want to see in the world. So, little 18-year-old Nola's gone and done an access course, feeling good, rocked up to the uni for the the interview. And then they're like, oh, tell us about this juvenile records. And I'm like, shit, you've got an affray, you've got assault, you've got this, you've got criminal damage, all of these things, which were bad. But like Romarilyn said, I mean, clearly that's behind me. I'm here in front of you. I've done the access course. I've busted my balls. I'm also a mum now. I've changed.
They don't see the value in what you're bringing to the table.
And the thing is, I didn't know what to say. I'm young. I come from a working class background. So I was just honest. I was like, I was going for a hard time. My life has changed. A week later, they wrote me a letter. You cannot be a social worker because you lack empathy, Nola Sterling.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, I lack empathy. And like Romarilyn said, all the things that I've been through for the system, where was the empathy for me? And then years later, when I go for the job at the NHS, same thing. I remember this HR woman bringing me in the office. By this time, I'm like, I've got to be like 22, 23. And she's like, oh, this is a little bit embarrassing, but we've got your CRB back. And there's a few, I know it's juvenile, so we're not meant to take it into consideration, but because we've seen it, I've got to ask. So what, is it expunged or not? Like, can you use it against me or not? Because it says that if it's a juvenile record, it's not meant to be used against you. So why do you let it show up on a CRB? If people see things with their eyes, They're going to want to ask. And
They're
once again,
prejudiced.
once again, I'm having to now explain about things I did when I was 11, when I was 12, when I was 13, when I was 14.
When you were a child, really.
When I was a child, your brain is not even fully developed till you're about 30 years old. We know that. So, but you want me to take responsibility for that, not thinking about the poverty, the adverse childhood experiences, the lack of support that I had, the family background that I had, none of that taken into consideration, and that I was in care. But no, none of that taken into consideration. So by the time I get to prison when I'm an adult, I've got the juvenile record, I've got this record, and it's just a whole thing. And people still ask about the juvenile record.
It reminded me there when you were speaking, you know, how people can speak down to you or condescending.
Yeah.
And I often think back, you know, if some professionals either going for a job or even going to the doctor and the secretary, how does she speak to you because she know you're on this medication or you're on methadone. And I often think back, like, if they spoke to me like that now, how I would be able to represent myself.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're from poor background, we don't have the vocabulary, we don't have the confidence to stand up to these people, and they know that. And they know that there's a power imbalance there, and you could feel shame, and you just might not challenge it. And then when you get older, you get educated, you get mature, and you think, "Oh, just speak to me like that now, please." Just
and that gives you the fire in your belly because you want to advocate for others.
Exactly.
Because now you know what to say, you know how to challenge that, you know that they can't just turn you away because they've got a duty of care. You know you don't have to leave the council because the thing is they wait for you to go so they can go. If you stay in there, they have to give you a hostel. But these are all the things we don't know. We don't know.
But that's why it's good that people like ourselves get involved in those roles where we can advocate for people. There was a case comes to mind when you mentioned the council. I was supporting a lady who was in a domestic violence relationship, and the flat got destroyed, and she was evicted from the flat. Not her doing. So she had to present as homeless, and she got scolded by like, "Oh, you want our support now, and you're just after wrecking your flat." And she came back to me in hysterical crying, but I was able to advocate for her. And don't you ever speak to her like that? You don't know the circumstances behind that flat, but the judgment that the services can have. And and these services then are the ones espousing trauma-informed practice. And they're the ones they're the worst for trauma-informed practice. The people that speak about it the most, that's what I find.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of a buzzword, isn't it?
It is.
Just a way for the criminal legal system to co-opt our language and our resources.
Do a day's training there, you have the certificate, and then
that's
I'm
it.
trauma
they don't
informed.
have to do anything. They just draw down this money from the government, get all these people trained, buy all this equipment, have all of these workshops and classes for law enforcement and etc. And then they don't apply it. It's just a total waste of resources that should be used in the community. That's why abolition is so important. You know, so all of our defund movements and reimagining, you know, law enforcement and our current, you know, policing system is all about shifting resources because we know people are going to be people. You know, they grew up in families that have, you know, generations of law enforcement and certain ways of thinking, biasness and prejudice, and that's just what they think, you know, and you can't change that overnight. But what we can do is demand that our governments put those resources in the community where the people are really most vulnerable, so that they have the resources, because the majority of folks, 90% or more, or incarcerated because of poverty crimes, not because they've committed murder, but because they've stolen, they've prostituted, they've been under the influence, some other type of addiction or some type of violence against them. This is why the majority of the people are incarcerated, which means we need more community care. We need to have the resources within our towns that help people have food, learn how to grow food, you know, performing arts, childcare, parenting, you know, work training, all of those things, and alternatives to incarceration and alternatives to policing.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be calling the police every time we have a spat. So if we're really going to be trauma informed or practice transformative justice, we need to have something within our own families and communities where we can sit down with each other who have been harmed, because we all harm each other, you know, and we come from backgrounds of harm, to say, this is why I did this, because, you know, years ago, I was traumatized by X, Y, and Z, and it came out this way, you know, and talk it out, figure how we can reconcile our differences. If I hurt you, then maybe I can help you. Maybe I have a skill set. Maybe I have something that I can do for you to help you. Maybe, whether it's babysitting your kids, cleaning out your basement, mowing your lawn for 6 months. Let me do that so that we can start to see each other as valuable community members with skills we can share. Because usually it's just frustration and anger and jealousy and envy sometimes that cause people to harm other people. I see something you have, I want it because I don't have it. But let's figure out how we can share more.
It's like that saying, hurt people, hurt people.
Hurt people, hurt
Yeah.
people.
Do you know, with regards penal abolition, is that like an absolute kind of an idea? Or is that like for certain offences? Or like how would that work in practice?
It has to be absolute to work, you know, and it has to be for everyone. It has to be for the person that kills their child, the person that kills their husband, their wife, the police officer. It has to be across the board in order for it to work. Because hurt people hurt people. These titles that we have and these positions in our families and communities that we have are those things. But what is the reason behind it? There's going to be a small percentage of people that may have some mental health issues, may really have some challenges that need hospitalization and medication and round-the-clock care because they are dangerous to others. But for the majority of folks that commit, I think, some of, you know, the most heinous crimes within our society, do so most times out of self-defense. They've been picked on all their lives. They've been abused all their lives. And you know what? Today is just not going to be the day. So today I'm going to strike back. Today I'm going to take my power back. Things like this happen every day. But because a person has had a long history of this kind of trauma and abuse and just beat down, it comes out differently. And sometimes you just can't stop.
Yeah.
You know, when you cross that threshold, sometimes you just see red or you just black out. You're just so full of anger and rage. You don't understand sometimes what you're doing. And when you look up, there's some bad stuff that has happened. And so those kinds of folks are not criminal. Those are not criminals.
There's context.
Exactly, but you're labeled criminal for the rest of your life when you didn't get the care from the police officers or from the community, from the social workers, from the teachers, from the priests, from the rabbis. None of them were there to help you and your family growing up. You struggled and struggled and struggled and cried and cried and cried. And what does that feel like for a human being? You know, to have to repress all of that all the time. It comes out in ways that, you know, causes harm. So when we talk about abolition, we want to make sure that we have systems in place that help people understand trauma and harm, but also that there is a system in place to help us reconcile with our community that we harm that doesn't involve standardized policing. There has to be a different way. And even if police continue to exist within our society, which most of us think that they will in some degree, there needs to be a different type of policing.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be calling the police to do everything. They should be called to do one thing, police. You know, when there's a serious threat to the community. stop inviting these people into our communities and into our lives who aren't trained to be social workers. They're not trained to be firefighters. They're not trained to be first responders, where they should be pulling cats out of trees and dogs out of, sewer drains. Let them do the hard work of policing. We don't call the military in to do those kinds of things, So I think over the years, the police have just become the kind of catch-all for anything happening in society because we don't want to deal with each other.
Yeah, you're right.
I think in a modern society where the cost of living is so high and both parents are out working, and like back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s when we grew up, there was a strong community spirit. There was grassroots things happening, but it's very hard for people to get involved in that these days because both parents are out working. A lot of the grassroots programs, the youth community initiatives that started up, they become professionalised over time, and the people from the neighbourhoods where they began, now they can't get the job, and you have outsiders coming in that don't have that community connection, and then the services in the community, the people from the community don't feel part of them.
Sure.
Like when I think of the youth club where I was in, it's a youth justice project for at-risk youth, And in the 90s, it was open door. You could go in, there was a community cafe, the youth workers were there. But now, if you're going up to it now, if I brought you up to it tomorrow to show you, there's a hatch, there's a buzzer. It's like going into a post office. It's like going into a bank. It's not very community oriented.
It's not inviting.
It's not. And the young people, they don't want to be part of it. And now they only go there because the probation officer is after sentencing them there. And I think it has to be voluntary. It was we loved going there. They could do the same work with us when we were in their voluntary, when it was more inviting. But over time, it just become this kind of bureaucratic kind of. It's like an institution.
Yeah.
It's like it mirrors other institutions that you're going to interact with down the line, like going up visiting your father in prison and you're looking through the hatch and you have to sign in.
And they condition you to become the next generation of prisoners.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with a lot of our high schools, especially our public schools, where there's metal detectors and resource officers and all kinds of policing and surveillance that happens on a daily basis. And you're conditioned from the time that you're in elementary school to the time you graduate from high school to be frisked, to be stopped, to be profiled, to be interrogated, to be criminalized, to be blamed, to be pushed out, to be locked out. Yeah. They put you on the path to prison.
It's true. Even with the exclusion, they've got something that they call, instead of detentions, they have something that they call seclusion, and it's basically like being in seg. And they've got all they've got it's like a little cubicle thing, and they put you in, and you just have to sit down in there. And if that's not conditioning, getting you ready for that, for children.
Solitary confinement.
Yeah,
exactly.
So the teacher probably puts them in time out when they're children, and then they graduate onto that, and then they graduate onto the cell, and it's all the same things in different forms.
So you're comfortable. People say, "Oh, how was it?" You're used to it. You don't even know why it's okay. You don't even know why you don't cry. You don't even know why this isn't painful for you. By the time we get to prison, it's just like,
how did I get here? Even though when you're older, you realise, because you have to reflect and see.
Or, they told me all my life I was going to end up in prison. Here I am. It's an expectation sometimes.
It's like a natural progression.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
It's shameful. So abolition, I think, is the only way for us to not only reclaim our communities, but to...
But do you actually see that happening in the next 10 to 20 years? You see this happening?
I see it. I see the shift from the last 20 years. Yeah. I see that in some communities and in some states in the U.S., policing is shifting. Folks who are joining the police force now are, more progressive in their policing. They're not just out to rough up people and play cops and robbers. They're actually trying to help people find housing, get off the street, get off drugs, etc., and so on. I see it shifting. And that's great. I think with every generation, we learn from our previous generation of what not to do. And I think it's happening. The problem is, like with all things, there's just a lot of old deadheads who are still in leadership, who won't let go and who won't die, that want to keep things the same. You know, these good old boy systems, they're just dragging us back to the past. We see it in our U.S. government. You know, they're back in business. And they're trying to take all of the progress away that we've made.
We see it in the UK at the moment as well. The government are doing a lot of cuts to vulnerable people at the moment, aren't they?
And the thing is that we
investing the
haven't,
money in war.
Yeah, but the thing is we
Crazy.
haven't learned, because like about 15 years ago when Tony Blair was in, and when actually it's a little bit longer than that now. Oh, shame my age. And when I moved to a different place from where I grew up to, all of the community centres that you were speaking about, the Sure Start initiatives for like the young mums, were all getting axed, cut. Now what do we see? The place where I live, a town called Croydon, is now like the stab capital of the UK and has such high youth violence rates. Why? Because 15, 18, 19 years ago, you guys closed down all the youth clubs. There's a direct correlation. It's quick maths, come on. Like, you don't need a PhD in applied maths to see what's happening here. And it's like they haven't learned from that. And now we're seeing it. Well, I would like to think that they haven't learned from that.
It's by design.
And they're going again when we're already on our knees. We're on our knees. Like, people that are working are going to food banks. You know, when you think of food bank, you think like the most impoverished people in society. Like, maybe you're doing a job that's like minimum wage, you're on 0 hours, so you're not getting the hours, so you haven't got money for food. But no, it's not. It's people that are working, but after they get their pay and they've paid their rent, they've paid this and that, there's nothing left. They're the ones going to the food bank. And even I'll go as far as to say middle class people, because you got your kids in private school, you got the mortgage, and you know, after that you got nothing.
Yeah, it's
You
like
got
that
nothing.
here. You'll have people in the homeless services here, working men and women, and they're living in a hostel.
Exactly.
But they're on
You go and
okay money,
work.
but they just can't afford the rent.
afford it.
But you know, when the wealth gets concentrated with a certain amount of people, they amass so much wealth that they're looking for things to invest at, buying up the properties. Like, you could have an
This is
apartment
it.
block here being owned by an American investor, a German investor, and it's so expensive then that regular people can't afford them.
Exactly.
And it's just the quality, like in Ireland at the moment, we're in a unique, like, we've always been a country of immigration through either religious persecution or war or famine or whatever. And or because it was a poor country because of all those things as well. But now it's a very wealthy country. If you look at the GDP of Ireland, it's like top 3, 4 in the world. So there's a lot of wealth in the country, but we've as much immigration now as we've had in the last 30, 40 years, because people can't afford to live here. And what good is having a good paycheck if it's the good paycheck is you still can't rent, you definitely can't buy a home, you can't get a space for your children in school. If you have a neurodivergent child, you might as well forget about it.
Yeah.
Because
They're so expensive, those assessments.
a space
and
in
the
a
waiting
school
lists.
like Hen's Teeth, there is rare. And people are under so much pressure, so they're going to Australia and they're going to Canada, they're going to the UK because they have better opportunities.
Yeah, I saw a friend, like, he's a neighbour, he works in our sector, and I said to him, oh, hi, how are you? I'm just having a chat. And he's like, I'm going. I'm like, you going? Where is that? I'm going to Australia. Me and my family were just waiting for the visa. They can't. There's no quality of life. So with that being said, we're already on our knees, and they're doing more cuts now. And I just don't. So in a sense, what Romarilyn is saying is right, because you know what has happened historically. You know that we're still suffering from the ramifications of that, and you're doing more cuts. What is going to happen? Who wants to live in that place that's like that? You know, there's a saying, when there's nothing left to eat, the poor will eat the rich. So, you know, and now when you look at things like mobile phone robberies, like street robberies, in the like early noughties, that was a thing, because smartphones were still new.
That's right.
So, and there were, you know, people were snatching them, but then 5-10 years later, nobody heard about it. It's back. They're stealing the mobile phones now, especially the iPhones. They're snatching them because we're going in retrograde. All of those things that were happening, the muggings and things, is back.
But the disappointing thing, in particular in the UK, is like when Trump got into power, we kind of expected what was going to come. But in the UK, it's the Labour government.
I know.
But they're as bad as the Conservative government. And like people now have no it doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican, Labour.
Everybody's centre now.
Yeah.
So they're practically all the
and
same.
everything is privatisation, cutting funding, and
They
it's
just
like
don't care.
where do people go?
Yeah.
Then people, but we have similar here. No matter who you vote for in Ireland, you're going to get Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, some variation of them, because they'll come together to keep others out as well.
That's right.
If they're not empowered themselves. So people then get apathy; they don't want to vote.
And the issues that we're discussing here is not affecting them.
Yeah, I don't know
It's not
why
their
we keep
job.
voting for these oligarchs. I mean, why do we vote for them?
Yeah.
Why do that? Someone needs to do the research on that, because that just blows my mind.
You know, the people that vote for them, they're doing okay out of the status quo, and the people that aren't doing okay out of the status quo, they feel that their vote doesn't really mean anything anyway, so they don't bother voting. And we've such a low turnout.
So you don't vote, or you vote for the wrong person.
Or you vote for the right person, but they're not getting in because
They're
the
not
likes
getting
of
enough
Fine
votes.
Gael and Fianna Fáil, our governments are coming together and they're forming this big government party. So then it's keeping others out.
But you can see it across in other European countries where specific parties within a country will come together to keep the alternative out. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like you could have a coalition of a government in a country where most of the country didn't vote for them, but they have enough seats between them. Do you know? And
Well,
then,
we had that, didn't we, with the condemn, and that was a disaster. Putting it mildly, that was a shit show. That was really, and we're probably suffering the consequences. But it's interesting that you speak about them coming together, because Tony Blair, with his quasi markets and his third way, essentially really started off. He progressed the work of Margaret Thatcher, and really he was a Thatcherite. He did have her ideology. He just so happened to be Labour, but all the ideologies that he had were from her.
a wolf in sheep's clothing.
That's what I was thinking of, that term.
We'll open it up to the group. Does anybody want to ask a question or say something?
Don't be shy, guys.
Go on.
We're all friends
You
here.
know you want to.
Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting. For people in Ireland, how, like I hear from the conversation about abolition, you know, where it is sort of not very, it's not very, how would you say that it's not popular in Ireland? What we have mainly is a sort of a reform movement that looks at improving prison conditions, investing in community sanctions, which is still the carceral legal system.
Yeah.
We are now looking at building more prison spaces. And I don't really see any uproar about that. So what can people, what can we do about it? Like, and like, I find this space interesting because you have sort of abolitionist histories and you're aware of all of that knowledge and so on, and then the two of you are more than me, you were like, you know, the whole Irish debate about abolition. It doesn't really
I don't
exist.
hear much about it.
We've only, the moment you mention it, you were like, it's not realistic. People do not understand what we actually mean by it. So do you have any advice for us?
We need to get Romarilyn over for a few months.
Exactly.
Well,
Stop putting people into shape around
maybe
us.
also, like the two of you,
Yeah.
what do you think?
But
How
when-
could we drive this
Yeah, but
forward?
when you think about it, when I brought you up to the Cork City Jail, the old jail, and the mental hospital down, like in Ireland, we've such a history of institutionalising people, and people are growing up in communities where prison is such either a prison or an asylum is just a omnipresent part of society. So trying to get people to think differently outside that's very hard. And if you mention abolition to people, they're like, they don't, and what about the paedophiles? They go to all this extreme ones, you know.
And
But
to
you're
be
trying
honest, like when we were talking today, like I was kind of thinking, well, how does that work? Like if you, like, how would that actually work where you don't send anybody to prison? Do you know? So, but the way you described it there, like it's like, yeah, we could look at doing something different. We could look at doing those things. But for me, when I suppose my mindset today, when we were kind of briefly talking about it, was like, and this is just, I suppose, my own bias, is if you do a certain thing, harming children, all these things, you should be.
They deserve, because
you know what I mean? And that's my conditioning, and because I've affected myself with all these issues.
And we all have those prejudice and bias, and I feel like that's normal. But you know what? Every time somebody asks Angela Davis this same question, she's like, I don't know what it will look like. We need to all reimagine it. Yeah. And it's okay for us to not know what it will look like, because we have all been conditioned from birth, like you said, to just believe in this institution of prison, locking people up, and ostracizing and othering people that fall out of grace and don't behave in a way. And we all know that these institutes do not rehabilitate. So what is their point? So really it's about rehabilitation, because the paedophile comes out of prison, he's your neighbour, he's outside your kid's school, because you don't stay in prison forever. So even that condition, because I have the same conditioning as you, but they come out. And you know what, when I was in the Netherlands, they have this program, and it was difficult for me, because that is something triggering for me. But they have this program that works with sex offenders, and they have somebody coaching them, helping them and speaking with them, and they have these open conversations. They'll go to something maybe similar to probation but not in the same thing, and they'll be like, right, I need you to be honest, what are you thinking about, where have you been, what, you know, and they have the space to speak about that. And maybe in speaking about that, they don't act on it, because you know all things start with a thought, right? You think about it, then you do it. But in speaking about it, it kind of like disperses it. Like people that are going to commit suicide, most of the time, if they have a conversation with somebody the day or just before, unless they're really dead set on completing suicide, most of the time there's a chance that they won't do it. Do you see what I mean? So we have to reimagine it. And I think what you said, James, about for and by, there's a big thing in the funding landscape right now that a lot of philanthropic foundations have closed their doors and said, no, we need to close this fund. We need to think about who we're funding. A lot of them are growing a conscience and realizing a lot of their money comes from colonization, slavery, oppression, all of this. And there's a move towards funding organisations that are for and by. So people that are in the community, that have the local knowledge, that have the local understanding. People, you want to work with people that look like you, sound like you, and understand you. Like you said, those are the people that you can build the rapport with. Like Romarilyn said, we all have this shared vernacular. I don't need to explain it. You get it. It's the same way if you're working with people in your own community, you can receive that message. You can communicate with them. And I think that abolition is all part of that as well. It starts with the grassroots, us starting to police our own community. When we had this big snowstorm in London, my neighbour, God rest his soul, he's passed away. He was like, oh, these lazy bastards. In my day, we'd be out with a shovel and a grit and, you know, with our bare hands. We were laughing. And he go, now you fuckers, you're waiting for the council to come and clean it up. In my day, but it's true, we are lazy. Because I'm paying council tax, I'm not going out there. They better come out with the grit. So our mentality has changed about, are we our brother and sister's keeper? When you see the person getting mugged or the woman getting harassed, do you feel like you've got agency to go out and be like, everything all right? You know?
We're geared to be individuals,
you
aren't
just
we?
cross the street and act like you didn't see it.
But the only bit of hope I take in Irish context, I heard the Minister for Justice speaking on the television a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, we've a new minister, we've a new government, we had an election recently. And you're always a bit anxious about what he's going to be like, or she, but say he. And he starts speaking about alternatives to prison for non-violent offenders, you know, a treatment instead of incarceration for people affected by addiction. So he's speaking the right language. And maybe, like, when people come at us with the paedophile or the extreme, maybe say, hold on a second now, let's start with the non-violent offenders, let's start with the drug users, let's try it there.
Let's start at the top. The ones who are committing the most heinous crimes, let's help them first. All of these low level of...
It's a tough sell in Ireland, in a
it's a tough sell
country.
everywhere, which is the problem. Because we don't want to be inclusive. It has to be across the board. Everyone, if we're going to do abolition, we're going to do abolition. you know, and it starts with all of those crimes that we have in our society that are taboo. We have to start there too, because behavior can be changed. A lot of times people have committed crimes at very young ages. They have matured out of those years. They know and understand differently. It is not once a liar, always a liar. Once a murderer, always a murderer. Once a thief, always a thief. I don't believe that. Once a pedophile, always a pedophile. I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that about the human condition, and I definitely do not believe that about the human spirit. We need to make sure, if we're going to create a world without prisons, that we are creating the conditions in which everyone, all of us, get a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, a fifth chance, and however many chances we need to change. Harm is going to happen because it is the nature of the beast, and we are all animals, and we all want to survive, and unfortunately we're conditioned to this dog eat dog, survival of the fittest kind of thinking. And until we stop thinking that way, when we start thinking more community, when we start thinking about our neighbors and coexisting and having diversity and being inclusive and really thinking about how we can make our communities, our neighborhoods, our schools and churches a better place where people feel welcome, accepted for whatever they are. Everything has to be about reconciliation, bringing the person back to their full self, whether it is from prison or from jail or from a mental institution, from the street, you know, or from the government, because everyone falls from grace. I'm not trying to preach here, but I'm just saying, in order for us to truly have that, we need to start looking at prisons as what they are. They are institutions of punishment. They're not places of rehabilitation. They absorb too much of our resources from our governments, too many tax dollars. They are temporary stays with no fixes. They don't fix anything. And they take an enormous amount of resources to maintain within our society. Resources that would be better served and used in our communities if we're investing billions and trillions of dollars into corrections in our countries, when it takes a fraction of that money to buy a person a house, put food on their table, get them a college education or access to college and good schools. A fraction, because that's all people want. And everyone in this room has seen or knows of someone whose life has been transformed because they now have opportunities that they didn't have before. And so we know this. So to folks who are in government, politicians, elected officials, etc., be better stewards with our money. We know if we invest in the right things, people will do the right things. Yes, there will always be some outliers out there and some people just, wreaking havoc because they need attention too. But we need to create spaces for that. And that could look like sports. It could look like, we have
a kind of a precedent in the north of Ireland with the peace process. So you had a lot of people in prison for a long, long time for bombings, murders, people being disappeared. And in the peace process in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement, the part of that was people were being released, people that had life sentences, that had 40, 50 years, that had done terrible things and they were all released as part of it. They didn't end up going back. A lot of them got involved. A lot of them are academics. A lot of them are activists, community workers. They got involved in politics. So that shows that people can do things, but if you give them an opportunity, the likelihood of them going back and doing it again is very slim. So we can just look at, but they're political prisoners. That's the label they give. But Baz, that we were in South Africa, where we came up about political prisoners. And otherwise, she stopped me. She says, "One sec, everybody's a political
Everybody's
prisoner.
a political
Yeah.
prisoner.
We're all results of political
Was
process."
that? Did you go to Robben Island?
Yeah, we did.
Because
Yeah.
I was there as well.
We were actually there on St. Patrick's Day last year. Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it is interesting, and I think as well, to add to that, like in terms of like the redistribution of funds, I think a lot of funds needs to go into healthcare, specifically mental health. Listen, we all have some kind of
Well, why do
mental
people
health.
have the mental health problems in the first place? Because they're not eating well, poor
Yeah.
nutrition, poor housing, poor schooling. It's everything leads back to the same stuff.
I just think we need to
Everything.
start having conversations here in Ireland around that stuff.
We're
because-
not investing in the right things. We're only investing in the things that people can afford to pay for. Shame on our government. It's shameful. It's just shameful.
But you know what, and we'll have to finish up there and I'll let somebody come in, but what's the most annoying and depressing thing at the moment is that there's so much wealth in the West and the cuts that ordinary decent people are experiencing, the vulnerable people are experiencing, to invest in weapons and war. It's like, you know, there's nobody engaging in diplomacy. It's all posturing and it's,
power.
and it's not cutting the wealth from the Elon Musks. It's cutting them from John Smith and social welfare.
Yeah.
Or cutting, you know, in England they cut the old people's fuel allowance and give, you know,
They
Ukraine
want to do it with
money for
PIP,
weapons.
which is the disability allowance. They're just, yeah.
You know, it's like you're cutting the wrong people. First of all, you shouldn't be investing in weapons, and second of all, you should be taking it from the top and not from the bottom. You know, so and then in Ireland, people on the bottom, then when they get cuts and they're struggling, everybody's competing for the finite
For the
resources.
scraps.
Yeah, then people start turning on each other.
Yep.
This is
The
it.
brown person is getting it, the Syrian,
Yep.
the Ukrainians,
Yep.
they're coming in here, they're taking this, that, and the
That's
other.
the plan.
And then everybody fighting for the scraps on the bottom.
Yeah.
And there's division. So
So we know what we should be done, but no one's listening to us.
no. No. But listen, we can only maybe we get the Minister for Justice down here sometime.
on, do it, Jess.
do that.
But listen, it's been a pleasure speaking to you too.
Thank
But
you.
to your first question that you
Yeah.
asked, you know, basically, you know, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Those of us who know what it takes to create the world we want to live in, we need to create that, you know, for other people. So traveling to talk to folks about prisons and care and rehabilitation and community, you know, that's what we should all be doing.
And the people in prisons around Ireland now will get to watch this from their cells, and maybe they get a more critical eye, maybe start looking at themselves differently, their cellmates, people on the yard, and their families, their communities, and I think that can be the start of something, you know.
Because that's the only reason why prisons exist, because people keep going back to them. They keep going back. They don't know any better. They don't know that there's opportunities out here. They don't know where to go to get help. And sometimes when they do go to get help, those places are under-resourced. So if we can put those resources there, point people in the right direction, and stick with them until they become the person they want to be, not we want them to be, but they want to be. I think we'll have a better world.
Ladies, thanks a million.
Thank
Round of
you
applause
so
for
much.
ladies.
Thank you.